What's the most formidable debate opponent that you have had in your career that you can think of now on this question of God's existence?
I don't think there are any. Not that I'm formidable myself, but I don't think that there are any very good arguments.
No point in a debate where you're sat there getting ready to get up and give your 10-minute rebuttal while they're speaking, writing your notes and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to say to that? That's a fair point.
Don't think so. I don't want to sound arrogant. It's not that I've got great points. It's just that I don't think there are any good points to be made.
Now, maybe it's something about the debate format as well. You know, everybody's so prepared that
Yes.
you're rarely caught off guard.
Yes. I mean, the sort of professional debaters on behalf of religion, people like William Craig.
I'm telling you, William Lane Craig is the most feared person in the entire apologetics debating world, especially for Christianity. And he's also the nicest, which is really interesting. More on that later, but let's keep listening.
No time for him. I mean, he's got...
He said, I have no time for him.
This sort of loud, rather pompous voice, and he says premise 1, deduction 2, and things like that, and the audience, I suppose, is supposed to be impressed.
I've had William Lane Craig twice on my podcast, and I always had a good experience with him. Having said that, I didn't debate him. I don't know what that would be like. It's something you're not interested in doing, debating?
I will say, cosmic skeptic here, Alex O'Connor, I think is his name. I've watched both the times, and he's one of my favorite guys to listen to when it comes to just being rational in conversation and not getting, again, emotional or heated or anything like that. But man, Richard Dawkins is a complete opposite. He's the name caller, accusatory kind of like, I'm like, what in the world? Like, you don't like William Lane Craig because of his voice and because of the way that he brings up his points or his mannerisms? Like, what a silly thing to even bring up, like goofy jab, which I was talking with my dad the other day, and he told me that I did that in my Lil Nas video. So shouldn't have done that same thing myself. So shame on me for the hypocrisy. But like, it's fascinating to me that Richard Dawkins happens to be the king or one of the kings of the new atheist movement. And in my opinion, he's probably one of the worst people who could represent atheism because of this exact point right here. He has always been very name-cally, very irrational in his arguments as well, in my opinion, where instead of just talking about the specific truths of the matter, what he believes to be the truths of the matter, he always gets very direct and personal with people and name-cally and jabby and like he gets very emotional when he's talking about these things because he just doesn't understand somebody else's point. Other atheists out there, even Sam Harris, I believe, is more rational in the sense where he can at least hear where you're coming from. Whereas I've heard Richard Dawkins be asked questions like this in the past of like, what's the best argument for God? And depending on who he's talking to, I've heard him give way more fair and rational arguments than this, or responses about, actually this argument from Christians I think is fair, but he's going to bring up a point which again is just mind-boggling to me about his big beef with Christianity. And it seems that it sometimes kind of ebb and flows on which is his biggest deal, but he's about to go into what is most common when I hear him mention.
William Lane Craig? Or have a conversation perhaps with William Lane Craig?
I have done. I've vowed not to. I feel such contempt for him because of his, I don't know whether you've seen what he says about the Israelites slaughtering the Midianites and instead of saying what any decent theologian would say, well, it never happened, and this is just an Old Testament story. He says, well, the Midianites had it coming because they were so sinful. And then if you worry about the Midianite children who had their brains beaten out of them, that's okay because they went straight to heaven. And that finished him off as far as I was concerned.
Now,
so he said that he will not debate him again. He won't debate William Lane Craig again, solely on the basis that he doesn't like one of his arguments, which actually Alex O'Connor, he was going to bring up in a second, the hypocrisy of a statement like that, which kudos to him for being like just really honest and transparent. This is probably a bigger deal for Alex to be able to talk to like the king of the atheist movement. But first off, like that's really futile. It's really silly and petty, I should say. Not to mention, like if you think that's such a bad argument, why wouldn't you want to do a whole debate with him on this one point so that you can just totally destroy him on this point? But man, just to say that you won't debate him because you don't like a point seems to be really strange to me. But again, it seems to be rather consistent pattern with Richard when it comes to his kind of view of Christians and his perception of like the weakness of Christianity. But he made another point, which I just want to talk about the philosophical, like apologetic aspect of this for a second. He said that if you were a good theologian, you would have just said it never happened. Okay, if you said that to him in a debate, he would go, oh, so you don't believe in the Bible. You don't believe that the things that the Bible say are actually real or true. He would go down a whole nother avenue with that, which is just like, no, you would tear somebody alive if they said that they just are going to reject that it ever happened. It was just a made up story or a parable. Like when you're hearing about the story that he's referring to, or, God, killing the AI people, or we can go on a handful of different examples like this, or God ordering the killing of them. Like all of these things are not written in any sort of poetic or allegorical type way. Like they're all written as if like they just happened. It was just a history response. And again, Alex O'Connor brings that up. He says like, hey, like these actually would have happened. Like you can argue that maybe even Genesis, you have a better chance of debating that Genesis was not a real event and that it was, and I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying you have a better chance of arguing that happened than arguing that something in midway through Numbers or Deuteronomy didn't happen at all. Like that seems way farther of a stretch when you're like just looking at the Bible and its, and its consistent patterns. But yeah, just this idea of saying I'm not going to debate somebody because I don't like what they're saying here is really, really odd to me. Like I would love to talk with somebody who's a non-believer because of having a really weak point. Like I would dive into that weak point. I'd really poke on that weak point to really emphasize my point. Last point I'll make on his logic there. When we are thinking of the immorality of God, few issues that atheist runs into. First off, there's nothing immoral about God wiping out people or God choosing to make other people wipe out people because you're an atheist. There's no such thing as morality at all, ever in general. So you can't ever tell somebody that their belief system is wrong ever. You can tell them that you feel like it is. You can say that you feel like God is immoral. You can say in your opinion God is immoral, but God is not immoral. It's impossible for God to be immoral if you're an agnostic or an atheist because there is no standard of morality. You can have your standard of morality, but there's no universal absolute standard that we all abide by when it comes to morality. So it's impossible for you to say that God is immoral. That's the first challenge. Second challenge on that. You are assuming God to be immoral because of how God responded in this moment or how God chose to handle this experience as if you know better than God what should have happened there. Also, not to mention God knows the end from the beginning, so it may have been a better idea for them to not exist than to exist. Alex also brings up later that maybe this was just Moses is doing it. It wasn't even God that was commanding it, but Moses was commanding it. And it wasn't even something that God ever asked for. But regardless, people always ask, where is God in the midst of evil in this world? In the midst of, all of the horrible atrocities, where was God when all those things happened? Well, somebody like the Canaanite people who had a god, Balak, and he would have his arms stretch out like this. It would be an idol, and his arms would be stretched out like this. And they'd put a baby in his hands, and they'd light a fire under him. And they're literally lighting on fire human babies, like out of the womb. So like no debate there, like babies who are alive and walking around or crawling around, whatever. They would cook their babies as a sacrifice to God. God, where are you? Why don't you stop all the immorality? And then God sends the Israelites to wipe out those people. And then God, why are you so immoral for wiping these people out? Like there's no winning. Was the solution to just have these people stop doing this in the way or the strategies that you had? Like, again, are you God in the sense that you can tell God, you can tell the potter what he should be doing in light of how he should be responding to immorality in the world? God is choosing to do it the way that he chooses to do things. And again, I'm not just doing this blind faith trust, he must be right. But like, I'm going to trust him over trusting you or myself and something like that, right?
For me, I actually wrote a piece in the Guardian saying I will never have anything to do with him.
I can see why you might sort of look at something like that and say that's an evil thing to think. That's an evil thing to say. I don't want to debate this person. A few moments ago, you told me that the idea of the New Testament in general about being born in sin and needing salvation is an evil idea.
Yes,
and yet that's an idea that many of the opponents that you have spoken to will have believed. They believe evil things too. So why particularly with William Lane Craig?
It's a fair point. I think the thing is that.
As a side note, we should really be praying for Richard Dawkins. I mean, he looks old. He looks like he's getting very old, which is sad to me. I've seen him he stopped doing interviews for a little while, and he's like started to do them again. I think he has a new book coming out. But I have a lot of, my heart breaks for him because I'm like, man, dude's getting old, and he's like not changing his views or perspectives in these things at all, which is sad to me. Also, I want to say, I debated one time somebody who was in the alphabet community, and he was a adult film star. You know, I'm not allowed to use certain words without the algorithm barking at me, but I did that. And this guy was one of the, he's like a very universalist, new age, vibey, I believe in God, we're all gods kind of viewpoint. And I loved our conversation. I've actually posted portions of it. I'll post the full thing at some point, but posted portions of it here on my channel. And every one of the arguments he made, in my opinion, were extremely weak. I remember right after I did that debate with this guy, like all my friends were like, dude, how'd it go? And I'm like, it was almost just like sad, because like the guy, he had no theological, like no reason to believe what he was believing outside of the fact that he just felt like it. Like he didn't have anything to go off of at all. It was sad to me, because I was like, man, like a lot of people don't even, know what they believe. But I like, for those people, like, it's a softball. So why wouldn't you love William Lane Craig, since he's such a softball and so easy to destroy in an argument? You'd want to debate him every day. So that shows me that that's probably not super intellectually honest, that that's his reason for not wanting to debate him. And again, Alex O'Connor just called his hypocrisy out and debating other people who believe things that he thinks are crazy and blatant lies. So
the Christian theologians who take this seriously are honestly well-meaning. I mean, they believe in the God of love. They believe in Jesus as the Son of God of love, and so on. I think the sheer, well, they would never have defended the slaughter of the Midianites and the Jebusites and things in the book of Joshua as somehow justified because the Midianites were sinful. I think it's an order of magnitude worse.
There's a resounding theme that anybody who is familiar with this passage is going to know exactly what I'm about to bring up here. But there's a theme of Richard Dawkins not liking the fact that God gets to be God, and Richard Dawkins does not get to be God. When we look at these passages, like Romans 1, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed against the heaven, against all ungodliness and unrighteousness, which people suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them." Within them. They know intuitively that God exists, for God made it evident to them. So not only does God exist, but it is known through them that he exists, and it is evident, meaning it's clear, like it's obvious to them. It says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, being understood by what has been made, so they are without excuse." A painting requires a painter. Paintings don't paint themselves. They don't just come into existence, or you don't see a bomb explode and paintings come all together. The same way buildings have a builder, buildings can't build themselves. Buildings are evidence of a builder. Creation is evidence of a creator. Now, we can argue what or who that creator is, but to say that there is no creator that created things is just such a crazy thought process to go down. It's Psalms chapter 6 or 9, somewhere in that range, where it says that the fool says in their heart that there is no God. It's one of the very few places in the Bible even mentions atheism. It's funny how the Bible doesn't even give much of the light of day to atheism because of how crazy the concept is. Agnosticism talks about it all the time. Paganism or this belief in this universalism, new agey kind of, we're all gods, everything is a god. It's all throughout Scripture, constantly throughout Scripture. But something like this, I think it's just so absurd that somebody could believe this, that it's very, very rarely spoken about. It says, "For even though they knew God. They knew that God was in existence. They did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their reasoning, and their senseless hearts were darkened." They had no ability to ration anymore. Claiming to be wise, Dr. Richard Dawkins, they became fools, and they changed the glory of an incorruptible God for an image of a form of a corruptible mankind and birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. What Richard Dawkins is doing here is defined biblically as idolatry. He is creating a God in his own image that looks just like Richard Dawkins, so that Richard Dawkins gets to do whatever Richard Dawkins wants to do. Because the only higher power that he has to hold himself to is himself. And whenever he wants to change his mind, he has a new standard to hold himself to. This is the horrible danger that we see in the atheistic movement, but also in agnosticism and a lot of new age, new world type things where everything is about you, preservation of you, self-love, self-care, self-focus, etc. And the Bible tells us to deny ourselves and pick up our cross daily. It tells us that we're not supposed to be focusing on ourselves. not only are we not supposed to be focusing on ourselves, we're supposed to put all of our intention and magnitude on the people around us. Jesus is asked, by a lawyer, what is the greatest of the commands for me to follow? And he says, the greatest is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you've done these, you have fulfilled all of the law and the prophets. And I think that it's very easy for us as Christians sometimes to jump past those things and go to the more trivial or secondary or tertiary topics in Christianity. And we get so head over heels or so in the weeds on topics like whatever it might be, whether it's, Calvinism, Arminianism, the gifts of the Spirit or whatever. I find a lot of Christians, even in circles that I'm around, would like to spend so much time and emphasis on this when I'm not seeing a lot of fruit in their life. Me and my wife were just talking about this with somebody who we know, where it's like, man, this person knows the Bible really well. They know Scripture really well. But this person also doesn't do a significant amount for Jesus. And people then will accuse me of works-based salvation or whatever. But Jesus has us on this earth so that we can glorify him and love and serve other people. And if we're not doing those things, or if we're just doing half of those things, then we're doing 50% of the mission, right? Love God, love people, make disciples of all nations. And when you ask a lot of Christians how they're doing in that area or what they're doing in that area, it's like silence, right? And I believe that if we had more Christians doing what we were commanded to do, we would see the be fruitful and multiply that we see in the book of Genesis. We would see very few Richard Dawkins type characters out there because they would be hearing about Jesus all the time and hopefully seeing that accompanied by signs and wonders. And I'm not talking about tongues. I'm talking about actually seeing God show up in a moment, whether that's through healing, word of wisdom, knowledge kind of thing, getting a word about somebody, whatever that might be, seeing something miraculous happen that is confirming that word, right? It reminds me of in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, this is kind of the let's say the litmus test or maybe the parameters and what it looks like to be a good Christian evangelist. Paul says, and when I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech, I'm reading an NIV in my head because I've memorized it in that. And when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with as someone superior in speaking ability or in wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony of God. For I determined to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. I was also with you in weakness and fear and in great trembling, and my message and my preaching was not of persuasive words of wisdom, but of the demonstration of the Spirit and power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of mankind, but on the power of God. I see there being a very huge deficit in Christianity right now of people not using this idea of the superiority of speech and eloquence of words. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of superiority of speech, eloquence of words, good debaters, etc. But I would rather be like a fool for Christ's sake and see God do all of the work instead of me be able to get any of the credit for it, right? And again, I honor William Lane Craig and Frank Turek and these other apologists who have gone before us and paved a way and helped us give a defense for our faith. I honor those people with everything. But I see such a lack in the space of the gifts being able to be used for people's salvation. Again, I'm not referring to for the body to just be edified and encouraged. That is part of it. I see all of the focus almost being over there. It's very rare that you see people like a Dan Mohler, who's in the camp over here, using the gifts for a sign for the non-believer, right? David Hogan would be another good example. I shouldn't mention this guy's name because I'm going to get called a charismatic or a heretic by everybody, but like Todd White. He's somebody who's using the gifts for the purpose of evangelism and seeing people come to Jesus. So we do speak wisdom among you who are mature, a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are passing away, but we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages of our glory, to wisdom which none of the rulers of this age have understood. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. We as Christians have an obligation as believers to do the things that Jesus commanded us to. Not for salvation. I'm not preaching works. I'm just saying that after we have been born again, that you are commanded to do works as a Christian. And my challenge for you is, what are you doing in that area? How many people like a Richard Dawkins have you spoken with? And again, I'm not talking about an apologetic debate. I'm just talking about how many of these people who do not know Jesus have you presented your faith to? You can do it online, but guys, this is a cheap cop-out. I don't even call what I'm doing here evangelism or outreach. Yes, it's part of the ministry that I do, but like the real ministry is when I go to the grocery store, when I'm at the gym, when I'm at a restaurant with my wife, whatever. Like that's where the real ministry happens. When I'm with my son at a Walmart, we get to talk to somebody about Jesus. That is where the real ministry happens. And this is real ministry. Again, I'm not downplaying what I'm doing here. I'm just saying I don't want people to think that you can just hide behind a camera and make a video and then hope that just checks off your evangelism for the day. Like I want us as the church, I believe that God wants us as the church to be way more radical in our works and not be so worried about burnout or doing it out of compulsion or if our heart rate. Like, I think we should just do more stuff and see as God really changes our heart along the way so that we have a more efficient ministry. But sadly, I see so many people waiting, praying, fasting, waiting on the Lord to do ministry stuff. Like, no, let's just jump headfirst into this stuff, dive deep into this stuff, and see how God shows up in the midst of it. That's in evangelism, but that's also in praying that God would show himself to these people in some sort of way, even miraculously, even if that's not really your background or what you're, I mean, again, for me, it's even challenging and uncomfortable at times, but it's something I'm praying for that I get more of in the new year, and I see God work in more of in my life in the new year. So if this has been of any benefit, please consider subscribing and watch this video over here for more.